Our next speaker is Jacob Billings, who is an artificial intelligence engineer and computational linguist. He obtained a BA in Middle Eastern Studies with an emphasis on Biblical Hebrew from the University of Utah. He received an MA in linguistics from Francisco American University in Guatemala City, focusing on the Quiche Mayan language and early colonial texts of the Quiche Maya and early mendicant preachers. Presently, he is a PhD candidate at Complutense University in Madrid, Spain, in the Department of Prehistory and Archaeology, where his studies involve the use of artificial intelligence and quantitative methods to recreate Mesoamerican language families in order to trace migrations and influence throughout prehistory. He is specifically focused on the influence of the Mixe-Zoque speaking people on other Mesoamerican cultures. Jacob's academic pursuits encompass a variety of interests, including artificial intelligence algorithms with historical linguistics and epigraphy, morphosyntax in Mesoamerican and Mesopotamian languages, the linguistics of the Book of Mormon, and the early members of LDS faith movement in the 19th century.
Hello, everyone. I hope that everybody's enjoying the conference so far. My name is Jake Billings, and before going forward, I have to admit that I am super excited about this presentation that I'm about to give. The reason that I'm so excited about it is because I can't tell you how many times over the years that I've had conversations with individuals who have expressed that there's no evidence or rationale for the belief in God, and that God was a man-made invention by people in the Bronze Age that didn't understand the sun. Or, more recently, and one of my favorites, that the belief in God must have come from psychedelic drugs. Well, this notion that there's no rationale or evidence comes with certain accusations for people that do participate in religion. These accusations are that those people that practice religion must do so because of tradition or because of social pressure or a mere blind faith, and that it requires the suspension of belief in reality in order to participate in religion. Well, of course, these accusations are false, and so it gets me really excited when I get to show that there is empirical observations and logical arguments that can be had for the existence of God, and that within the LDS tradition itself, the Book of Mormon shows these arguments. And so my purpose today is to show you how the prophet Lehi in 2 Nephi 2 came to a conclusion of the existence of God by observing reality around him and observing the natural world. So let's jump right into the presentation and begin. My presentation is entitled All Things Denote There is a God, Lehi's Discourse on Natural Theology in 2 Nephi 2. I want to start with a quote by the late author and noted atheist Christopher Hitchens. In his book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, Christopher Hitchens states the following: what can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence. And this phrase kind of came to be known as Hitchens' razor, kind of a litmus test for evaluating religious evidence. And kind of later on, it became kind of a rallying cry to be able to dismiss religion outright. But if you're looking at this for the first time, it seems reasonable. It seems reasonable to believe that, if there is no evidence, we can just go ahead and dismiss it. However, Hitchens defines what evidence he's willing to accept later on when he says anything a priori is not accepted. So anything based on spiritual manifestations or authority of the Bible or anything of that matter is rejected. Only that which is observable. So therefore, in Christopher Hitchens' mind, he's kind of put an end to the claims of religion and God himself. But in reality, this isn't really the case, because while traditional theology is concerned with finding the attributes of God through revealed truth, through text, such as the Bible, Book of Mormon, natural theology is concerned with finding the attributes of God through observation. So what is natural theology? Well, as previously explained, as opposed to traditional theology, natural theology is the idea of finding the attributes of God through through observable nature. So natural theology begins with things that we can sense. The world around us, causality, and it ends with something we cannot sense, God. So this argument reasons from what is most immediately knowable, our sensible reality, to what is not immediately knowable, God and divine reality. Therefore, as I previously mentioned, as opposed to traditional theology, natural theology wants to look at the natural universe. The history of natural theology takes us back to ancient Greece. And ancient Greece, Plato kind of talked about a little bit about natural theology in some of his writings, but it was really Aristotle that took off with it. And Aristotle reasoned that there were things in motion in the universe. Elements are in motion. And there are two states of these elements. They're either potential or actual. And as one element moves on another, it goes from potential to actual. This observation of motion led Aristotle to a conclusion that to know something, we must know, to know it fully, we must understand the four causes. Knowing just one of these causes is enough. So the four causes that he came up with, that he reasoned, were first the material cause. So what is the element made out of? Second is the efficient cause, the source of the object's principle of change or stability. Third is the formal cause, the essence of the object. And fourth, the final cause, the end goal of the object, or what the object is good for. So if we take a look at an example of this, why does water boil? Well, if I were to ask a scientist, why does water boil? He would talk about the hydrogen and the oxygen atoms and boiling points, probably many other things, altitude, whatever. And he might say, well, that's exactly why water boils. But for Aristotle, that wasn't enough. There were still three more reasons why we had to figure out, or why we have to understand, that we have to understand in order to know why water boils. So if we look at the formal cause, we look at the of what indicates, or what the form is of water boiling. So we look at the bubbles that it creates. We talk about the water temperature. We talk about the steam coming off there. The third is the efficient cause, which is the heat applied to the pot. Okay, because the heat rises the temperature, which causes it to boil. But even with these three things, those three causes, we still don't, for Aristotle, it wasn't enough. We had to know the final cause. And that final cause is, I wanted a cup of tea. Or in other words, I caused all that to come into, the boiling water to come into existence. And so if we talk about the boiling water in terms of potential and actual, because elements are in motion, the pot of boiling water at room temperature was not, was it a potential to boil. But because I caused it to be, because I applied the heat, I set in motion, I set those elements in motion to become actual boiling water. And then as I take that heat off and allow other elements to act upon the water, it goes back to, it has a potential to become room temperature again. So all things are always in a state of actual or potential. These four causes and this idea of motion in this observation of motion in the universe carried for a long time. And in the 13th century, a monk named St. Thomas Aquinas really studied this idea of motion and observation and took it to another level. And he created in his masterpiece, the Summa Theologia, he created 5 arguments for the existence of God: the argument for motion, the argument from efficient cause, the argument to a necessary being, the argument from gradation, and the argument from design. Now, what we're going to see, I'm not going to go into these arguments right now that St. Thomas Aquinas came up with, but in just a moment, I'm going to show you how 2 of these arguments are shown in 2 Nephi, in 2 Nephi 2. Lehi explains these arguments and also the idea of motion and actual and potential and actual concepts within 2 Nephi 2. So now, with an understanding of Aristotle's view of natural theology and a little bit of background on St. Thomas Aquinas, we can move into Lehi's arguments in 2 Nephi 2. And he puts out 2 arguments. The first one is the argument for motion. The second one is an argument to necessary being. Now, you notice that these 2 arguments were in the list of the 5 ways of St. Thomas Aquinas. And the arguments are very similar, although they differ to a certain degree. They're a little bit more in line with Aristotle's view. And those differences we're not going to go into in this presentation. But for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to call these 2 arguments the argument for motion and the argument to a necessary being. So let's jump in. The argument for motion starts in 2 Nephi 11, where he says, "For it must needs be that there's an opposition in all things. If not so, my firstborn in the wilderness, righteousness could not be brought to pass, neither wickedness, neither holiness, nor misery, neither good nor bad. Wherefore all things must be compound in one. Wherefore it should be one body. Wherefore, if it should be one body, it must needs remain as dead, having no life, neither death, nor corruption nor incorruption, happiness nor misery, neither sense nor insensibility." And then he continues in verse 13, and he says, "If you shall say there is no law, you shall say there is no there's no sin. And if you shall say there is no sin, you shall also say there is no righteousness. And if there be no righteousness, there be no happiness. And if there be no righteousness nor happiness, there be no punishment nor misery. For there could have been no creation of things, neither to act or to be acted upon." Now, so Lehi sets out 4 important points here in these 2 verses. Let's look at those. First is there's motion in the universe. Lehi calls this opposition. And this opposition or this motion can be observed. It's a cause and effect relationship. The elements act on each other. The second point is that motion is the force by which an object changes from potential to actual. So, if there is no wickedness, there can be no righteousness. There can be no potential, or there can be no actual and no potential. Third, motion is dependent. The presence of motion necessitates interplay among entities. Because all these things are in motion in the universe, there is they act and react to one another. And this is because they do move. There's a necessity to interact. 4, because there's interplay between the entities, there are causal events. So there's cause and effect. This cause and effect is the essence of what allows us to move from potential to actual. So if there's no sin, there can be no righteousness. If there's no law, there's no sin. So these things have to exist. This causal event and this cause and effect has to exist. Otherwise, there's no existence. So this brings up a very the most important part of this of his argument, and that is, if the universe exists and things are in motion, and because nothing can bring itself into motion, then how did motion come into existence? And this is the problem of infinite regression. And what the problem of infinite regression states, that is, if there's a series of events, if one thing acted on another, that then acts on another, then acts on another, into infinity, this can't regress into infinity. Because at some point, because nothing can cause itself to move, there must have been a first mover. There must have been something that put all this motion into effect. Otherwise, there could be no existence. Lehi, so for St. Thomas Aquinas, he called this a first mover. And he posited that this was God. Lehi comes to the same conclusion. In verse 15 it says, "And to bring about his eternal purposes in the end of man, after he had created our first parents, and the beasts of the field, and the fowls of the air, and in fine all things which are created, it must needs be that there was an opposition, even the forbidden fruit in opposition to the tree of life." Therefore, Lehi comes to two conclusions here. One, that there was a first mover, and that was God. He put this opposition into effect. Second, just like elements cannot cause themselves to move, elements can also not create themselves. Therefore, Lehi makes the argument that not only was God the first mover, he was also the efficient cause of everything that's come into existence. So therefore, when Aristotle talked about the efficient cause, Lehi is stating that the efficient cause of this was God. That he put all of this in motion and created all of this, and was the catalyst to put everything in motion. With the argument for motion, since we know that objects can't put themselves into motion and objects cannot create themselves, there must have been, Lehi posits, there must have been a being outside of the cause and effect chain. This being would become an uncaused cause. In other words, a being that's not subject to the effects of cause and effect, is not subject to those laws, to be able to put this in motion. This leads us into the next argument by Lehi, and that is the argument to a necessary being. And in verse 13 he says, "And if these things are not, there is no God. And if there's no God, we are not. Wherefore all things must have vanished away." Well, this argument, it reflects back on what we know about reality. One, we know that we have an existence. And two, we know that things come and go in reality, or into existence. So the argument to a necessary being states that since objects in the universe come into being and pass away, it is possible for those objects to exist, or for those objects not to exist at any given time. Since objects are countable, the objects in the universe are finite in number. If for all existent objects they do not exist at some time, then given infinite time, there would be nothing in existence for individual exigent objects. Therefore, a necessary being. Now, this is a lot of a lot of big words to say this. Elements in the universe come and go. They can exist or not exist. Since there are a finite number of elements in the universe, given an infinite amount of time, after a long time, they would cease to exist. And so there would be nothing in the universe. The universe would cease to exist at some time. However, because we know that there is a universe and it continues, we know that there is a necessary being. Lehi points this out in verse 14. And he says, "And now, my sons, I speak unto you these things for your profit and learning. For there is a God, and he hath created all things, both the heavens and the earth, and all things that in them are, both to act and to be acted upon." So Lehi puts God above the causal chain, an uncaused cause, a necessary being in order for the universe to continue. Now that we've examined these arguments by Lehi in 2 Nephi 2, we can start to kind of unravel these criticisms made against the religious practitioners and more specifically members of the LDS faith. That we don't just rely on revealed truth. We can come to truths of the gospel by observational means, by empirical means. Lehi, when coming to these conclusions, came to them through observation of the natural world. He recognized that there's motion in the world, and this motion interacted with other elements, and this caused a cause and effect relationship. This cause and effect relationship, he realized, couldn't go on forever, because nothing could create itself and nothing could put itself into motion. Therefore, there must have been a prime mover and an efficient cause. And further, there must have been a necessary being, someone that was outside of the causal chain that could create all these things. Therefore, if we re-examine the statement by Christopher Hitchens that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence, we can see that there is empirical evidence and rationale to believe in God. Thank you.